This is Camila Ritter, business advisor and supply chain expert. And welcome to my podcast, The Morning Mood. And today we're going to talk about forecasting. A couple episodes ago, I spoke about when does supply chain start? When do you start managing the supply chain? When is the import department responsible for the supply chain? And the answer is the minute that PO is cut, you are responsible for the supply chain. And I don't care if that PO is 6 months out, 6 years out, whatever the situation is, you are responsible for that shipment the minute the PO is cut. So that led to the conversation about forecasting. How do we forecast? When do we forecast? Why is forecasting important? And how, as a supply chain leader, do you pull a forecast out of your buying team, which can be extremely difficult to do, to be totally honest with you. What does forecasting mean? Traditionally, forecasting used to mean an annual exercise to figure out how much we think we're going to get and how much we think we're going to use and how much we think we're going to need and how much space we're going to use and how many packages. And it was kind of this annual exercise. And at the most basic levels, companies say we want to grow 100% next year, 200% next year, 10% next year, whatever the growth goal is. That's where the forecast starts. And the forecast tells the company, this is how much we think we're going to grow. This is where we think we're going to go. This is what we think we got going on in our company, et cetera, et cetera. If you're a publicly traded company, it's what your stock prices are based on. So this is what a forecast is. It's typically done on an annual basis. And almost always in supply chain, it was always done on an annual basis. Now, the most basic companies that I've worked with just take what they did last year or what they thought they did last year, and they multiply by the percentage of growth. And that's kind of maybe where they come up with a forecast. Some of them don't even bother to do that. I have worked with organizations where no one knew who was responsible for the supply chain forecast. Literally, no one knew. I talked to the supply chain team. Oh, we're not responsible for coming up with the forecast. Okay, interesting. But we'll go with that. Okay, so then who comes up with the forecast? Well, we don't do it. That's not our job. We don't come up with a forecast. We're just told how much we're going to have. Okay. We're going to go with that. Then who's doing this? Who's supposed to tell you how much you're going to have if you are not responsible for this? Well, no, it's the planning team who tells us. It's the planning team who tells us how many containers we are going to have every day or every week or every year. That's their job. So I go to the planning team, and the planning team's like, we don't figure out how many containers we're going to import. That's not our job. Our job is to figure out where it goes and how much we should buy and what warehouses it should go to. And yeah, we have some input on when it should ship, but we don't figure out how many containers. That's not our job. That's supply chain's job. Okay, so you can see where this went, right? This circle went on for a while, as went back and forth on whose job is it to figure out how many freaking containers do we think that we're going to import. And through this process, what we uncovered was that their forecasting obviously was completely flawed, because all they had been doing every year to figure out how many containers and volume and trucks and warehouse space and shipments is just taking what they thought they were going to do the year before and adding a percentage. But the problem is that they weren't actually tracking what they were actually doing versus what they thought they were doing. And it turns out what they were actually doing was about 100% more than what they actually thought they were doing. And because of this, because they had zero idea of how many containers they were actually moving on a regular basis, they were failing constantly, to the point that they had budgeted money for accidental accessorial charges because they just had them all the time. So they're like, why not? Why shouldn't we just budget for that? Weird, right? But they had no visibility, so they had no idea what they were doing. They couldn't prep their steamship line, they couldn't truck the truckers, they couldn't prep the warehouses, they couldn't prep anybody because they thought that they were moving 2,000 containers a year and they were actually moving 8. I don't even know how you do that without knowing, but it happened. So this is why forecasting matters. So at the highest and most macro level, why forecasting matters is because we are dealing with the situation with everything that has to go down the supply chain from that PO order. We need to make sure that we've got trucks lined up, we have warehouse space lined up, we got freight forwarders lined up in all of the ports that we think we're going to bring stuff out of. Do we have all of the trucks on the domestic side? Do we have warehouse space ready to accept this inventory when it comes in? Do we have enough inventory to meet customer demand? That is what people focus on the most, customer demand and how much do we have to buy to meet customer demand. But they don't go much further than that. And if you don't go further than that, you can't plan for all these other pieces in the supply chain that will make your supply chain successful. And here's what happens when you don't have a good forecast. You have this situation like this client who actually budgeted for accidental accessorial charges. That's ridiculous. That should be 0. You should never have to budget for that. Ever, 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 ever. Never budget for that. That's what happens when you don't forecast. When you don't forecast, you have ups and downs in your warehouses where these big slugs of stuff comes in. We can't get space on a ship because we didn't know we needed this much. A freight forwarder doesn't have space available for an LTL. All of these things happen when we don't have a good forecast. Your expense, the cost of your supply chain, when you don't have a good forecast, I'm going to throw a number out here. When you don't forecast well, you increase your supply chain cost by about 30%. I was slow on that because I was doing math in my head of all the clients that I've worked with and how many have, so with my new camera, when I put up an L, it thinks that I want to zoom. And you know how I like to talk to my hands. So we got some action going on here. I got to keep my hands on myself. So back to what I was talking about. Shit, I lost my chest. Oh, it took me a minute to come up with the 30% number because I was doing math in my head and moving my fingers that looked like a zoom signal to my camera. And that's how I lost my train of thought. So I'm back. So about 30% increase in your supply chain costs. That's your total supply chain cost is about 30% higher when you don't have a good forecast. And the reason for that is because you haven't done all your procurement. You don't have everything secured the way that you need it. You don't have enough ocean freight. You don't have trucking. You don't have LCL. You don't have any of this stuff lined up because you didn't know it was coming. So in general, I estimate a poorly planned supply chain costs about 30% more than a well-planned forecast. A well-planned supply chain, a supply chain with a forecast. Okay. So we've established why forecasts matter, right? It matters the frustration of your team, the cost of your supply chain, everything. This is why forecast matters. So why is it so hard for companies to forecast? Why is this even a topic of conversation? Here's the thing. The example I just gave you, supply chain, we don't know how much they're going to buy. They tell us. Well, we don't know how many containers we're bringing in. That's supply chain job. There's this gap between buying and planning and supply chain. And in some companies, it's a chasm. It is the Grand Canyon. And they just try to lob shit back and forth over that every day. Not my job, how am I supposed to? What, you didn't tell me. It's crazy. I see it all the effing time. The worst thing that I see, and you are not going to believe this when I tell you, they actually sit and can see each other. And they do this shit. I couldn't believe it. I see it all the time when I walk in and I'm like, can you actually fucking see each other? And you do this stuff all day, texting back and forth, this nasty, you can't coordinate anything and you can actually eyeball each other? What the fuck is that? That's bad leadership. That's what that is. But anyway, so forecasting. So why is it such a big deal? Why do companies get strung up on this? Why does it turn into this huge exercise of like just pain and crying and tears? Here's why. You have to be able to deal with ambiguity. It's one of Amazon's original principles and one of them that nobody ever talks about. And it is probably the thing that put them on the map, dealing with ambiguity. A lot of the problems that we were solving in Amazon in the early days didn't exist. I mean, we didn't know there were problems. We just know that customers were having issues. We didn't know what the actual problem was. So that is what dealing with ambiguity is about, is dealing with the unknown, but still coming up with a plan. And that is what forecasting is about. And that's where companies stumble, because many companies can't deal with ambiguity. And so what they do is the very classic, very old style, very outdated, and very expensive practice of set it and forget it. Last year, we forecasted to do 24,000 containers. We think we're going to grow by this many X, and so just add 10%. Or not even that. Some companies can't even get to that. We don't know. We have a growth goal, but we don't know how many containers we're going to get. We don't know where they're going to come from. We don't know how we're going to get it. We don't know. We can't tell you anything. We can't give you any information, supply chain, because we don't know. That is not acceptable, and it doesn't work. You heard it. You heard it. Unacceptable. Will not accept. I don't know. Not going to take it. Not going to accept it. If you've been one of my clients or you worked with me in supply chain, you know, you've had this conversation. Nope. We're going to sit here until we come up with a number. It may not be the right number. It may only be about 60% accurate, but that's where we're going to start, and then we're going to refine it. We're going to continue to hone that number until we get to a number that everybody is comfortable with. That is how we're going to work into a forecast. We're basically going to back into it, is what we're going to do. So what you have to do is you have to sit down your finance team. Is the best place to start is finance. We take all the emotion and chaos out of it, because merchants don't want to be held to something they don't know what's going to happen. And that's acceptable. That's real. I get that. I don't know, Kim. I don't know how much I'm going to buy. I don't know what I'm going to buy 10 months from now. I don't know what the customer demand is going to be. I don't know. I understand that. I'm not asking you to write anything in stone. And this is your message to your merchants when you go and talk to them. I'm not asking you to commit and give you your firstborn. I'm asking for an idea. So a lot of times the best place to start is with finance, because finance can just look at the numbers. So if you're dealing with a situation where everybody is like, nope, we can't forecast, we can't tell you what's going to happen, so you're just going to have to figure it out, this is how you start. You start with finance. You go to the finance department. And at the most macro, biggest, broad brush level, what is your corporate growth goal for the year? 20%, 30%, 40%, 10%, 5%, 100%, whatever it is. Whatever that corporate growth goal is, because you committed to somebody with that growth goal. Your investors, the street, somebody's bonus. You committed to somebody on that number. That is a committed number. You may not reach it, but it's a number you committed to. You start with that number. We expect 100% growth next year, Kim. That's our goal. That's what we're working towards. That's what we're building our books to support. Great. How much of that is going to be domestically sourced versus foreign sourced, imported? Generally, they have a pretty good idea of that, okay? If you don't, take last year's split. We did 50-50, we did 60-40, whatever. Unless you have a corporate goal to go into a new industry, a new product line, a new customer base, a new market, probably your domestic imports, but it's going to stay about the same unless there's a big initiative. 100% growth, 50% domestic, 50% import. Great. Great place to start. We have a number, a dollar amount at this point is what we have. We're expecting to grow by $500,000. $250 million is going to come from domestic. $250 million is going to come from imports. Great. From then, we back into the actual cost of the goods. Gross goals are not cost goods. Cost goals, that's a gross goal. We break it down to a net goal. We start to get the actual cost of the product we think that we're going to buy, a 50% increase. And that's the other thing, and this is where a lot of companies make mistakes, is they take that 50% and they go, oh, we'll just get a 50% more for import containers. Depends on your mix. Okay? So great. If you can get to that level, if that's all you can get to is $250 million in additional imports and 250 million in additional domestic product. And you can get down to what that actual cost, if that's a gross goal or a net goal. If it's a gross goal, get down to your net cost for that. And then take your average container value and divide. It can be that basic. It can be that basic. Now, the next level, and you can operate with that. You can take that to market. You can take that to RFP. You can take that to your warehouses. You can take your truckers. You can take that somewhere. Now, if you can get even more granular into this, we can break it down corporate goals by product group, by whatever, however your divisions are broken up, by division, by product group, by company, by however you're broken up. We can get down deeper into it because the more information we have, the more granular it can get. So if we know that we have a really big growth goal, let's say you have a 100% growth goal, but 70% of that growth is going to come from exercise equipment. And most of your business up until this date had been trinkets for, shelf trinkets. That's going to shift your value of your containers because they're going to be higher. You're going to have less units. So the more granular you can get, if you can get down to division, product level, all of that sort of stuff, new markets we're trying to get into, you can fine tune how much you think a container is going to be valued at on average. You can start to break it down by product group division, right? So we expect to have 1,000 more containers for our shelf trinket division, and we're expecting to have 4,000 additional containers in our home exercise equipment division. So you can get down to that level. So this is how you start to mark into a forecast for supply chain. Again, I talk about this in another podcast, and that the easiest way for you as a supply chain leader to start to collect this information and become part of the bigger organization is to plug into what already exists. They're already doing forecasting and buying planning. They're already doing that. Plug into it. Take that information and model it into something that works for you. The worst thing that I see, and this is where supply chain hits a wall every damn time, is a new supply chain leader comes in and they march in and they're like, this is how I do it. And this is how everybody has to plug into my supply chain process and you have to provide me all of this in a special way so that I can do my job. It will fail every single time. Don't do it. No, don't Zoom. My talking hands are getting me in trouble. We're zooming in, we're zooming out. So don't go in there demanding that they plug into some new process that you've just created. They're already doing planning. Skim off of what they're already doing. It will go much better. Trust me, you will get a lot more cooperation if you do that. So that's what you do. You plug in, what are our growth goals? Back that into a container forecast. Once you back that into container forecast, then you take that container forecast back to all of those people and you say, here's what I've estimated that we're going to do next year. Does this make sense to you? And a lot of times you'll get some feedback in there that's very helpful. Where they're like, no, I don't think that's actually how much we're going to do, where I thought we were, or you will get some really good feedback. You have to do that second step, which is to take it back to them and say, this is how many containers we're looking at. Okay. So everything we've been talking about up to date has been really kind of annual planning. But the truth is, in today's environment, it's going to have to be quarterly. We need to revisit forecasting on a quarterly basis. And I know that makes it very difficult for companies that are used to doing annual procurement, trucking procurement, ocean freights, all that kind of stuff. The market has become so volatile that companies are moving to doing this almost on a quarterly basis. Keep that in mind. Everything that I've talked about now about forecasting and why it's so important, we've been mostly talking about it as annual because that's how it's traditionally been done. But everything I just talked about really needs to be done on a quarterly basis. Revisiting with finance, revisiting with the merchants, revisiting with everyone. This is what we planned. Does this still stick? Does it still make sense? How do we need to change it, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. You still need to have the same conversation on a quarterly basis. And you have that conversation, the follow-on conversation. No, bring back in. You have that conversation, the follow-on conversation with your vendors, right? So your ocean freight carriers, your truckers, your warehouses, your stuff like that. Here's how we have tweaked our forecast. We need more, we need less. Trust me when I tell you this. Your partners, your vendors, your truckers, your ocean freight carriers, your warehousing companies, all of those companies will appreciate that you're coming back on a quarterly basis with updated numbers. They will 100% appreciate it. So please, forecast. You must forecast. It does not have to be 100% right. It is not written in stone. It is living. You need to revisit it on a very regular basis. But that's how you get a forecast, and you must have one to run an efficient supply chain. So that is everything I have for you today. Thanks for tuning in. I truly appreciate you. We've got some good stuff coming up, and thank you for being here, and we will talk tomorrow.